books are great things. They help us explore other worlds and learn about people around us. But what about the books that help us learn about who we are? So right now, we're going to examine some of those books that help us understand why we are the people we are, right here on Cover to Cover. Hello, I'm Ernie Manouse. Welcome to Cover to Cover. As you just saw in The Great American Read, there are lots of great books out there helping us to figure out who we are. But you know what? There are even more books than they were able to address, so we've brought our friends together here in our book club to help you figure some of those out. Would you like to meet the panel? We'll start off with Pierce Bush. He happens to be the CEO of Big Brothers and Big Sisters Lone Star, but he also has a family dedicated to literacy. Welcome, Pierce.
Thanks, Ernie.
Frank Billingsley, you know him as a great weatherman, but also the author of Swabbed and Found. Welcome, Frank.
Thank you.
I feel like I'm doing a game show setup here. Jennifer Mathieu is an English teacher and the author of the hit book Moxie. Welcome to the show. Good to be here. And finishing off our panel of contestants, we have Christine Laveau-Haley from the UH Honors College, and she also happens to be a political commentator on the local and national scene. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Okay, so all of us love to read books, and we love to get lost in the adventures of them. But there are those books that help us figure out who we are and why we make the choices. Frank, first time you read a book where you started to think, it's not just about them, it's about me.
You know, a separate piece was probably the first, as a kid, was one of, because I grew up on Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew and the Happy Hollisters, you know, and all of those books that were popular in the 60s, and then the 70s came along, and The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton, Susan Hinton's book, was a terrific, two-night read for me. I just amazed at these new characters with different lives. And when you read about characters with different lives, then you think, well, what does that mean to my life? How do I fit into this whole quilt of lives around the world? So that probably set the stage for me. I've always loved biography, and it doesn't even have to be true biography. It can be fictionalized biography, but reading about people. And then I founded People magazine. No.
And then you really knew about yourself.
But that was one of my favorites. I was so happy when that came along. It's like, oh, I can read all about people now.
So Jennifer, what is it in writing that helps you? I mean, you're developing characters, but while doing it, are you thinking of the audience, or do you have to be true to what you're writing?
You know, I think, well, just what Frank was saying, books to me are either windows or mirrors, right? So they're windows into another world, and we can learn about other worlds, or we can reflect on our own experiences and have them validated in literature. That's what I tell my 10th graders at Bel Air High School all the time, windows and mirrors. When I'm writing my characters, I try to sort of release myself from the audience, though, and I really admit selfishly as a writer that I am writing them for myself first. I have to know them. I have to know, what they want to eat for breakfast, and what do they keep hidden in their nightstand drawers, or what are their biggest fears or embarrassments. They have to be full people to me for me to be able to actually tell stories that ring true for readers. Yeah. So really, essentially, when I'm writing for myself first.
So Christine, if I'm thinking about this correctly, if a character is truly written well and honestly, then it will automatically relate to an audience. Make
Absolutely.
sense?
I think it resonates with people when they see themselves in the character. And that's why with the book that I chose, and we're going to talk about that, it's, does the experiences that that character is going through, have I had those experiences, or can I relate to that? And that's when you know this is a good author and it's a good book, when you can say, yeah, I've been through that, and this is how I dealt with it. Or by reading this, maybe I'll deal with this issue like the character did, actually.
Okay, Bush family is known for literacy, and there's been a lot of emphasis on reading. Growing up, overwhelmed by books?
Well, my grandmother was the enforcer. And to be honest with you, I love how you placed me next to the English teacher. Because,
no pressure.
As much as I love stories, reading as a kid, I was just a typical boy. And it wasn't until probably middle of high school that I really started to enjoy reading Holden Caulfield and just some great books that my English teachers were able to help me learn. What I love about stories most, though, is exactly what we were talking about earlier, is you look at any great story, it follows the hero's journey. And, I don't relate to Harry Potter, for example, but I relate, and I don't know why, maybe just because I'm not into magic, But if you look at it, it's always about a hero, which is the protagonist, and they're facing a challenge, and they meet a guide, and the guide faces them gives them a plan. And there's all these philosophical questions, external questions, internal questions that are addressed through that narrative. And then there's a very clear presentation of the negative thing that could happen or the positive thing. But I like stories that I can relate and say, I know heroes that have gone through those similar journeys.
Okay, let me throw this out to all of you and any of you. Has there been a point in your life where an experience has happened and you've thought back to a book and thought, that's going to help me through this? Have you found a specific point?
Does the Bible count as
Well, yeah, I
the
guess-
book?
yeah, it's a
I mean,
book.
There's a lot of good advice there.
Yeah.
I was a philosophy major as well as a journalism major, and there were certain philosophical, even Nietzsche said you just got to laugh through it.
Yeah.
That the laughing man is the winner because it's all happened once and it's going to happen again.
But are there
if you're in traffic,
characters-
you might as well just say, well,
That's traffic. But are there characters, though, that you say, that one's going through what I'm going through, and I've learned something from that experience?
I can say, and it's not a character because it's also nonfiction, but I remember moving to Houston 20-something years ago. I was in my early 20s. Who am I? What am I trying to do? Who am I trying to be? And I was reading Joan Didion's Slouching Towards Bethlehem, which is her collection of essays, including one where she moves to New York and she doesn't know anybody and she wants to be a writer and she's trying to figure herself out. And I remember just reading that essay over and over and over like a touchstone because I thought, my gosh, yes, like I am so lost and confused. Who am I? What do I want to be? And to know that she had managed through it. Now, I'm no Joan Didion. I wish that I could be. But just to know, like, this amazing author who inspired me and writer at one point felt just like I did. And that, I would return to that for comfort often.
Yeah.
I typically probably read more nonfiction, but I find when I'm going to bed, there's nothing better than reading a really good piece of fiction. And I think it's because when you're reading nonfiction, it makes you think this stuff really happened, the world's out there. But when you read fiction, it kind of takes you away, with all due respect, from the 10 o'clock news. And it makes you get lost.
Oh, poor Frank.
Well, and I love Frank.
I read every night for exactly that reason. Yeah.
But it makes you think about the possibilities and what the world can be. And that's a very soothing thing, to live in the realm of possibility, not just the realm of kind of the here and now. And I think that is the real gift of fiction. Fiction is a great enterprise to help you put to
I love
sleep.
that point. And I think that what takes me to is the fact that as you dream and imagine through fiction, it does automatically make you look back at yourself.
Absolutely.
Are these things possible? Can I do this?
Right, or I can do this. And it's funny because it is fiction, but I'm a professor, so nonfiction is kind of my thing.
I've surrounded myself with nonfiction people on a novel show.
But there's something special about somehow those characters are so real that you can say, yeah, I can see myself like this. Terry McMillan, of course, has all of these great stories about Black women kind of going through life, and I see, yes, I've seen myself in those, including, Stella, who got her groove back. So yes, I mean, if the character is done right, then you can see, even though it's fictional, you say, yeah, I can do that, I can be that, that's me.
Okay, I'm going to switch the question then and flip it over. So, characters, stories where you say, nah, not me, I can't get this, I don't know where they're going with it, this doesn't help me go any further. Are there books that can be a dud to you that other people have said, oh my God, this is the answer?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Got a book for me?
Well, yeah.
Let's
okay,
call
so
him out.
So my husband, when we
Oh,
first
we're calling
met,
out the husband now.
calling out
Here we go.
my husband I love dearly, but when we first met, he was reading a book by William Faulkner, and I read Faulkner in college, and I could not get into him. I couldn't, and so my husband's literally reading Faulkner. We were volunteering on a theater production together, and we were on a break. And I walked up and I was like, oh, Faulkner, how could you ever, And it was Faulkner and Fellini films. Those are the two things he tried to turn me onto that it didn't work. And but for him, Faulkner just rings true. And so I have bought him Faulkner novels for gifts. It's ultimately the joy of literature is that there are entry points for all folks, and not everything's going to ring true, and that's okay. And as an English teacher, I would say, give up a book if you don't like it. Stop reading it. Don't force yourself unless your teacher's making you do that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I wish I was in your class.
Really.
So many great books out there on trying to decide who we are and to help us on that journey. But what books did our panel pick as their favorites? Christine, you get to start first.
All right, great. I chose Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. And I chose this book because it's by an African-American female author. It's about an African-American female, and it resonated with me. It is a story about independence for a woman, and it's interesting because it's written in the 1930s. So we have this African-American woman writing about what it means to be a woman in the years, kind of the decades after slavery, a black woman. And what's so nice about it is that it's something that I think all women can relate to, because there are expectations that are put on all of our lives as women. It's, from very young. Expectations of how you behave, of who you are, of what you'll be, and of what you will not be or will not do. And so that's what she focuses on in her novel with the main character, Janie. And she's a pretty woman, and so everyone puts her kind of on a pedestal, but she wants to live. Yeah. And she wants to get out there, and of course it's simple living, but she wants to fish, and she wants to talk to other people, and she finds who she is through a love story. And it's a love story between a black man and a black woman, which I think is powerful and beautiful. So she says this: Janie fooled around outside a while to try and think it wasn't so. If she didn't see the sickness in his face, she could imagine it wasn't really happening. Well, she thought, that big old dog with the hatred in his eyes had killed her after all. She wished she had slipped off that cowtail and drowned then and there and been done. But to kill her through tea cake was too much to bear. Tea cake, the son of the evening sun, had to die for loving her. She looked hard at the sky for a long time. Somewhere up there beyond blue ether's bosom sat he. Was he noticing what was going on around her? He must be, because he knew everything. Did he mean to do this thing to Tea Cake and her? It wasn't anything she could fight. She could only ache and wait. Maybe it was some big tease, and when he saw it had gone far enough, he'd give her a sign. She looked hard for something up there to move for a sign, a star in the daytime maybe, or the sun to shout, or even a mutter of thunder. Her arms went up in desperate supplication for a minute. It wasn't exactly pleading, it was asking questions. The sky stayed hard looking and quiet, so she went inside the house. God would do less than he had in his heart. Tea Cake is her love. And she was married twice before she meets Tea Cake. And she's married to these men who possess her and put her on the pedestal and want her to be who they think she should be. And she does that for most of her life. And then she meets Tea Cake, and the courage to kind of say, I know what the expectation of me is, and I'm finally going to do what I want to do and be who I am. And she does it with Tea Cake, who's a very, who's not a wealthy man, but he loves her for who she is, not for who he wants her to be.
Wow. Pierce, follow that up.
So,
what's your book?
The book that I chose is This Is Where I Leave You by Jonathan Tropper. I read this book in 2012. I have a weird habit. If you were to go into my house, you'll see that I mark every book because my grandparents in Maine, and I sign it, but I put the date I finished it and everything else. Because my grandparents have so many books in Maine, I'm always just curious going through there and saying, I wonder if my grandfather read this book, you know?
So is that a whole family tradition?
No, it's not, but I wish it was, because in their books, I'll find, though, a ticket from, say, Houston to Washington in 1969. So a bookmark, so a clue that it was read, but I just think it's a cool idea. So anyways, this kind of probably also means I'm slightly a hoarder. But what I liked about this book, it's a story of a family that experienced the loss of the patriarch, and they all get together. It's a Jewish family for a Shiva, and it's really just a celebration of the human spirit, the flawedness of it all, but also just the love and just everything. It's just such a beautiful, funny book. So do you want me to read?
I would
I'm
love
try to
for you to
honor
read.
your 2-minute commitment here. It's a really great book. I cannot say enough about it. And especially now when my grandmother passed away, I thought about this book as our family came in to kind of honor her legacy, and you saw all the kind of habits coming out and everything else. Penny, Jane, Maine, none of the above. There are options is my point. The girl gassing up her blue Toyota has piles of kinky brown curls, held off her face with a black headband. She has great skin and funky black glasses that convey a sexy intelligence. She's a magazine writer, or maybe a photographer. When she looks over at me, looking over at her, I smile. She smiles back, and I fall briefly, passionately in love with her. Options. I want very badly to be in love again, which is why I'm in no position to look for it. But I hope I'll know it when it comes. My father's watch jingles loosely on my wrist. My mother's words resting unseen on my skin. You found me. It gives me hope. I pull onto the interstate, grinding the transmission once or twice on the way to 4th. Dad made us all learn on a manual, his massive forearms flexing as he worked the stick. Clutch, shift, up, gas. Clutch, shift, up, gas. I hear him in my head and smile. We can all drive stick. We can all change a flat. We can all repress our feelings until they poison us. It's a complicated legacy. I'm not a fan of country music, but there's no better music to drive to. Turn the right song up loud enough on the Porsche sound system and it will swallow you whole. The past is prelude and the future is a black hole. But right now, hurling towards north across state lines for no particular reason, I have to say it feels pretty good to me. Tonight I'll sleep in Maine, which I will too tonight, it turns out. Tomorrow is anybody's guess. I've got a baby girl on the way, a borrowed Porsche, and 14 grand in a shopping bag. Anything can happen.
Wow, very nice. I love the visualization of all that. Frank, you're up.
Oh, I get to follow the memories of the Barbara Bush funeral.
Yes, please.
Well, my book is about death.
Okay.
But that, joy and comfort and hope, I think when we face death and we face it differently and learn to face it, I think we do find a certain joy and comfort and hope. Because none of us gets out of here alive, as they say. This is by Paul Kalanithi. It's called When Breath Becomes Air, which if you think about it is exactly what happens. Paul, young guy, smart guy, goes to Stanford, wants to be a writer, ends up being a doctor, and not just a doctor, but top of his game, top at Stanford, neurologist, neuroscientist. On his way, his wife, an internist, both top residents. Paul's diagnosed in his mid-30s with stage 4 lung cancer. He goes back to his writing, which is why he went to Stanford in the first place. He wants to tell the story of his life, what he went through to get where he is, and now at the precipice of success and half his life he's been working to graduate as a neurologist and has so much to offer the world. And here he's on his way and his wife's on his way, they're gonna get going and suddenly this, death sentence. And he's a doctor, he knows what's coming. So what he does is he writes a #1 bestseller and a Pulitzer Prize winning finalist. And to tell the story of how he faced death. Now, a friend of his, this passage I want to read, a colleague of his, commits suicide, perfectly healthy, but takes his own life. Mm-hmm. So now he has to deal with that. I wished desperately that I could have been walking with him out the door of the hospital that evening. I wished we could have commiserated as we used to. I wished I could have told Jeff what I had come to understand about life and our chosen way of life as doctors, if only to hear his wise, clever counsel. Death comes for all of us. For us, for our patients, it is our fate as living, breathing, metabolizing organisms. Most lives are lived with passivity toward death. It's something that happens to you and those around you. But Jeff and I had trained for years to actively engage with death, to grapple with it, like Jacob with the angel, and in so doing to confront the meaning of a life. We had assumed an onerous yoke, that of mortal responsibility. Our patients' lives and identities may be in our hands, yet death always wins. Even if you are perfect, the world isn't. The secret is to know that the deck is stacked, that you will lose, that your hands or judgment will slip, and yet still struggle to win for your patients. You can't ever reach perfection, but you can believe in an asymptote toward which you are ceaselessly striving. An asymptote, I had to look up. It's a line that almost touches a curve but never gets there. In the popular vernacular, it's Well, we're only going to be friends. We're going to get close, but we're only going to be friends.
Well, speaking of that, Jennifer,
Yes.
what are you going to share with us? What deep philosophical book are you going to share?
Well, so my book is Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, by Judy Blume. And as I've mentioned, I'm a 10th grade English teacher at Bel Air, and I write young adult novels. And I had somebody once ask me when I was going to start writing. I think they phrased it, "When are you going to start writing real books?" And I smiled and I, contained myself, because I'm of the thinking that books for teenagers and young people matter. They are real literature, and they are often the first entry points for many of us as readers to wrestle with big issues about who we are, what we believe in, our family struggles. And so Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret is about a young woman named Margaret Simon who's just moved to New Jersey from New York City. Her mother is Christian and her father is Jewish, so subsequently she's been raised with no faith. And suddenly in the suburbs of New Jersey, you have to have a religion. In New York City, it didn't matter so much. And so she's starting to sort of wrestle with these big questions of who she believes, what she believes, and goes through all of the angst of being a teenager and being especially a teenage girl. But this part of the book is her parents don't know it, but she prays, and she talks to God very much like a teenager would, just in her own voice. And so this is her first night in New Jersey. Are you there, God? It's me, Margaret. I'm in my new bedroom, but I still have the same bed. It's so quiet here at night, nothing like the city. I see shadows on my wall and hear these funny creaking sounds. It's scary, God. Even though my father says all houses make noises and the shadows are only trees, I hope he knows what he's talking about. I met a girl today. Her name's Nancy. She expected me to be very grown up. I think she was disappointed. Don't you think it's time for me to start growing, God? If you could arrange it, I'd be very glad. Thank you. My parents don't know I actually talk to God. I mean, if I told them, they'd think I was some kind of religious fanatic or something, so I keep it very private. I can talk to him without moving my lips if I have to. My mother says, God is a nice idea. He belongs to everybody. So.
Well, very nice. And I think we've learned just a little bit more about all four of you. Notice I don't have to read a book, so you don't learn anything about me, but you know what you do learn? It's game time. Are you guys ready to see how much you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
There is HQ out there. This is our version LQ. Here we go. Everyone's been given their little dry erase board, and here is our first question. Which of the following books is narrated by Death, who states, even death has a heart? Is that from Ghost, The Hornet's Nest, The Book Thief, The Death of Bees? Oh, you can't show it too quickly. It's a game.
Sorry.
People are going to cheat around
I'm
here.
copying her answer, so I've got it.
I wonder what the answer is.
Exactly, the English
And
teacher.
everybody, reveal your
Are we ready for the reveal?
Let's just say I know it wasn't Ghost.
Oh my God, you all got it right. That's
I'm a
it
very
is.
nice
Ernie,
teacher.
I'm very grateful for my placement now, the chair placement.
Exactly, we've turned him around. It is The Book Thief. Ready for the next one?
Okay.
Says the
Here
best
we
seat.
go.
I'm gonna be more careful.
The book is marketed as a sequel to Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, released 55 years after Mockingbird was released. The title of that book is Go Set a Watchman, Flowers for Atticus, Macomb County, Mockingbird Reborn.
Flowers.
What's the sequel to Kill a Mockingbird, which some say was a prequel? All right, we're almost out of time. Come on. What is it? Is it Watchmen, Flowers, Macomb?
I'm just,
Nope, I'm not going to be on that
Wow,
wrong.
only one of you got it right.
I'm guessing.
That would be the
Go,
that would be the
go
English
set
teacher.
a Watchman. There's the answer.
This is stacked
Talk about
against
this
us.
deck stack that gets
Okay, are you ready for? We're ready for one more. And if Frank doesn't get it right, we're in big trouble here because you answered it wrong. The Outsiders author S.E. Hinton published using her initials to hide the fact that she was a woman. But what do the initials S.E. stand for? Samantha Ellen, Susan Eloise, Shannon Elizabeth, Summer's Eve.
Oh my gosh.
Hold on, can you say the options again?
Samantha Ellen, Susan Eloise, Shannon Elizabeth, Summer's Eve. Frank now is the first to turn it around before. What? Well, Frank got it right because he mentioned Susan earlier. It was our
I was
second
amazed
one.
that, a lot of people didn't know that was a woman when she wrote
Right,
it that
that's
way.
why she did it that
not.
way.
It was all about these teenage boys.
Yeah.
You know what a lot of people don't know either? We're out of time.
Uh-oh.
That brings us to the end of the show today. Thank you all for playing. I want to tell you, next week we're going to be talking about heroes. So we're going to talk about all those heroic things, heroic characters, great books that inspire you. We'll be joined by New York Times bestselling author C.C. Hunter and also the Houston Spider. Cool. Yeah, you have to tune in and see that. I want to thank our guests today. I want to thank Pierce and Jennifer. I want to thank Christine and Frank for joining me. Remember, a special big thanks to the Houston Public Library for hosting us and letting us do our show here. If you haven't voted for your favorite book and the Great American Read, go to pbs.org or your local station's website. And of course, until next time, on behalf of Houston Public Media, I'm Ernie Manouse. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.